All right, welcome in everyone. It's time for this week's Sports and Leisure History Look Back. Excited to be here. We'll be looking back at our history from the week of July 6th through July 12th. As always, I'm Jeff Klein. I'm your host, and I'm joined by my good friend and the big sports brain, Clayton Hamilton. How you doing, Clayton?
I am doing fantastic. Another weekend in the books.
Yeah, we're heading into the All-Star break. Today is technically the last game of the first half, though. We're a little bit past the first half. It's never really exactly the half. I actually saw an interesting factoid with all the players dropping out of the All-Star game. Did you know that Dylan Cease is the first Blue Jay to start the All-Star game since Roy Halladay in 2009? And Christopher Sanchez is the first Philly to start the All-Star game also since Roy Halladay in 2011. I thought that was interesting.
Did you also know that Dylan Cease looks like the sheriff in Young Guns 2 that gets killed outside the bar? And he also looks like every extra in Tombstone.
I didn't know about the sheriff, but he does look like an Old West.
Oh, yeah. No, go look up Young Guns 2 when the sheriff goes to the House of Ill Repute to arrest Billy the Kid. He looks exactly like him. It's like this. It's the same dude.
That's what you get, folks, on this show. Obscure Young Guns 2 references.
That's the leisure portion of sports and leisure.
Exactly. What are you looking forward to in the second half of the baseball season?
I want to see the AL Central race between Cleveland and the White Sox. And they're sort of dead even on winning percentage. I think Cleveland has played 2 more games, won 1 more, lost 1 more. So it's going to be a pretty tight down the stretch. They play each other 6 times about a week after the trade deadline, and then then they play about mid-September. So 3 games in Chicago and then 3 games in Cleveland. But I'm very curious as to what both teams will do at the trade deadline. If I'm Cleveland, I want right-handed power that can play left field, right field, DH. And if I'm the White Sox, I want 1 more starting pitcher.
You know, it's crazy how the White Sox have turned it around so fast. I mean, they were horrendous.
Oh, they were so bad the past couple of years.
Yeah, and they're good. I love a lot of their young players. I was disappointed to lose Miguel Vargas from the Dodgers, but I understood that trade, and he's really turned into a great player. And I love Chase Meadroth and Colson Montgomery. So that's a fun White Sox team. I agree with you. That's going to be a really fun race.
Yeah, and I'm curious as to which one of them is able to fill their needs at the deadline, and will they be able to? And if I'm Cleveland, I'm calling up the Angels and seeing how I can get Joe Adell. And if I'm Chicago, I'm calling up the Nats and I'm seeing if I can get Foster Griffin.
Yeah, one thing I hope Chicago doesn't do is sort of trade away some of these young building pieces to get greedy right up front. I mean, they're going to have some good seasons ahead of them. What's worked for them right now is they've got a lot of these young pieces, and a lot of them have worked out early on. And if they could keep building off of that and just, treat this season as playing with house money, that's what I really hope they do. So I don't want them to sort of get short-sighted and give up on a lot of their future.
Yeah, I agree. But you can't go into the second half of the season and roll into the playoffs with your 5th starter being Eric Fetty. You can't do it.
That's true. Also, we got World Cup is rolling along, getting further along in the tournament. Who do you like in any of the remaining teams? Do you like any of the remaining teams?
I think FIFA really likes Argentina. Right. And so if FIFA likes Argentina, that might be the favorite at the betting window. Because FIFA seems to get their way. But out of all the teams, in terms of watching them and wanting to see them maybe succeed, I guess maybe either the winner of the Spain and the France game is probably where I would find my rooting allegiance. The Spanish team seems likable enough. The French team is likable enough. So I think whoever comes out of that one is who I will support.
Yeah, FIFA seemed to have what's the opposite of a phantom wire? Because there was a wire in that game, and the ball clearly hit the wire in that Argentina game. But then they said it didn't
Then
exist.
no, they said yeah, it didn't. No, it didn't. That which is what you got to love about FIFA is that it does not matter. It does not matter what evidence you have. You're like this. See the ball? The ball hits the wire, like right here. Ball wire hit, and FIFA's like, no. We're like, but it is, and they're like, no. It's like was it like the maid on was it Family Guy? She's like, no,
Right.
no, yeah. That's FIFA.
Yeah.
They're just
Well,
no.
Well, I guess the matches have been pretty close. It's getting a lot of TV time. I think a lot of people are getting into it. So we'll see what happens. Before we move on to our history, I did want to make a mention and congratulations to Linda Noskova of the Czech Republic, who claimed her first Wimbledon title, actually her first Grand Slam win. And on the men's side, congrats to Jannik Sinner. He repeated as Wimbledon champ. Pretty good. I feel like we're in such a transitional era of tennis where, a few years from now, we're going to be talking about a whole new set of champions. But it's exciting right now because there's a lot of parity in tennis.
There is a lot of parity, particularly on the women's side, that you can go into just about any event and make a case for about 16 different women to win. Not so much on the men's side. Carlos Alcaraz was not at this Wimbledon, which made it a little bit more wide open, but still Jannik Sinner got it done. But Alexander Zverev, despite perhaps what you might think with the 4-set and maybe the way the last set went, was very much in that match and had a good chance of winning the second and third set if a point or two went his way. So not as dominant by Sinner as you may be led to believe by just looking at the scoreline.
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on. I just want to remind everyone out there that you can follow us along on our social media. So check us out on all your favorite or not so favorite social media accounts. That's Blue Sky, Instagram, Substack, X, and YouTube. We're at Sports History SL. That's Sports History, the letter S, the letter L for Sports and Leisure. And on Facebook, you can still find us at Sports and Leisure. So like our content, share it, comment. We're getting a lot of comments from people following along on World Cup and Wimbledon and so forth. So it's been great. Love to see hearing from people out there and getting their thoughts as sports fans. All right, ready to get into it, Clayton?
Let's do it.
Okay, so we're going to continue with Wimbledon because we had a great post from earlier in the week on July 6th. Back in 2013, American identical twins Bob and Mike Bryan, sometimes known as the Wonder Twins, became the first doubles team to hold the Golden Slam at the same time. If someone's not familiar with the Golden Slam, it's holding all four majors and also Olympic gold. They had won Olympic gold in 2012. They were so dominant in that Wimbledon in 2013 that they didn't drop a set until the semis. But I think a lot of people forget about the Bryan twins because the doubles doesn't necessarily catch on as much as singles.
Yeah, doubles is almost never on television until the final, and then it's usually on either before or after the women's final on that last Saturday. And it said unless you seek it out, it's very hard for it to get any sort of foothold. But I felt like maybe the exception was the Bryan brothers. Yeah. And that was because they were so dominant, particularly when it came to Davis Cup and international team plays, that one of the things that a lot of the other countries always had problems with is who plays their doubles. They're both singles players come together and play the doubles? Do they have one of their singles players and someone else play? But the Bryan brothers always held down Saturday. And that's something that Team USA was always talking about. I know Andy Roddick has been very vocal about it, saying that what he loved is that he knew if he took care of business on Friday, that they could be done by Saturday afternoon, and he might not even have to worry about Sunday. And that was something that Team USA had an advantage on maybe some of the other places around the world, because there was no debate about who the men's doubles team was going to be when it came to the Davis Cup.
Yeah, and what made the Bryan brothers so good was that they had one was left-handed, one was right-handed, so they locked down the middle of the court. They were aggressive with their returns. They coordinated their movements really well as a team, and I think they had that showman style, that a lot of flair, a lot of charisma on the court, which, as you mentioned, they were kind of the exception to the marketing of doubles, and I think a lot of people in tennis who are really in favor of promoting the doubles game really point to them, that if the media sponsors get behind them and TV gets behind them, they could really create something that a lot of viewers want to tune in for.
One advantage that they had perhaps over other doubles teams is that they never really traded each other away for anybody else. And so a lot of times on the doubles, there's a lot of partner switching from tournament to tournament around the world, and so there's hard to get that consistency. You had the Woodies there for a little bit, and then you had the Bryan brothers, and if they had not been identical twins, perhaps they both seek singles glory, and we never have this. But they just loved playing with each other so much that they decided, you know what, this is going to be our thing.
Yeah, and they were big money earners. They earned as much as maybe the top 10 or top 15 singles players. They had sponsorships with Adidas, Wilson, Oakley, and then later Esurance. And Esurance actually built an entire marketing campaign around them, and that really did catch on for a bit. And I think they're famous that they had that chest bump that they did when they would win, and I think some of that really played into sort of that TV spectacle that a lot of fans and even casual fans really want to tune in for, because then they became kind of that storyline that you really get with the singles players. And I think for tennis, it works really well as a single or individual sport, because that's the big thing, right? Is following individual players and the personalities and not really following a team like other sports. But because the Bryan brothers, as you mentioned, were together for so long, they kind of had that running storyline that was attached to both of them as a singular entity.
Yeah, you were it's sort of like when you have a really popular player in a sport that you don't follow. Like people that didn't follow golf knew who Tiger Woods was. Right? If you don't follow tennis, like you knew who Serena Williams was. It's the same thing for singles fans of sports. If you don't really follow doubles, you at least knew who the Bryans were, and that gave you somebody to root for. But one of the things that I think is probably overlooked the most about their success is just how good of an individual player each one of them was. You think a lot of times about doubles players not being able to make it on the senior or on the singles side, but when you look at Bob Bryan, he's routinely hitting 130 mile an hour serves, 140 mile an hour serves. And when you couple that with Mike's play at the net, he was one of the top net players, not just in doubles, but all over tennis. That makes for a real lethal combination between the two, particularly on Bryan's serve games.
Yeah, and I think for singles players, they really focus a lot more on that singles game. If it becomes a little bit of a vicious cycle, or kind of feeds into itself, because TV doesn't push the doubles game as much. They push the singles game more, which means the payouts are better on singles, and that means players are going to focus on their singles match. I think when players don't have sort of those skill sets that allow them to excel at the singles game, where maybe their skill sets lend a little more towards coordinated play and a little bit more narrow court that you find in doubles, that's something where people get relegated to that doubles game. And I think that's where the true hardcore tennis fans follow those doubles, because I'll admit, as big of a tennis fan as I am, I'm catching singles matches, but I'll watch doubles if it's on TV, but it's not must-see TV for me.
Right, unless it's the Williams sisters playing together. And they had the same thing. It was like the Bryans. It was a package deal, and it was really easy to market. But you see a lot of times some of these players that are having success in doubles are maybe sort of middle-of-the-road singles players. You think about Yelena Ostapenko, and yes, she has a major, but her biggest success at Wimbledon this week was in mixed doubles. And that's where she's really been making her money, even though she's in the singles draw. She's making it in doubles and mixed doubles.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes the top 25 singles players, they'll end up playing doubles, and sometimes it's for fun, or sometimes they just kind of want to give it a try, but it's not something that they're really fully invested in. And feel like it's when there's a poker game and someone's used to play that like high level poker, and then one day they decide they play the lower limit game and kind of slum it around on the lower game. I think that's something that that's the feeling that sometimes comes across with the doubles game, is that those big time personalities dominate, and then it's unfortunate for the players that are really good at doubles because they get overshadowed by some of these people that bring in a little bit of a bigger name.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes people that get knocked out in the first round are hunting for a check,
right? Because
they're like, oh, does somebody get hurt? Somebody have to drop out? Who needs a partner because I got knocked out in the first round and I need to make some money at this tournament? And we will see when it comes to doubles. The mixed doubles at the U.S. Open had experimented last year with running that tournament early before the singles draw to try to get stars in it, and they had sort of altered the scoring and set system in order to attract them. And there was some pushback from players that make their hay doing mixed doubles, saying, wait a minute, what about us? This is what we do all the time. You're going to push us away into major just so that you can have TV money. So we'll see if that sort of catches on in the mixed doubles, but not to stray too far from what the Bryans were able to accomplish, but boy, they were a fun watch, and they made you keep the TV on at least at Davis Cup time when it was time for that doubles match.
Yeah, for everyone out there who doesn't remember quite how dominant they were, they had 438 weeks at number one. They won 119 doubles titles. They have 16 majors. Those are records for doubles. The gold, as we mentioned, and they were just so dominant and so late into their career too.
Mm-hmm.
Going into their late 30s, they would win constantly, and I think it was the really unique style of play where one was left, one was right-handed, and that just really allowed them to be just dominant for so long.
Yeah, and one of the underappreciated stats is that they won all 9 of the ATP 1000 events, which are one step below the majors. And try this one on for size, Jeff. This is their career record, 1,102 and 358. It's getting it done.
Yeah. That is getting it done. Yeah, I have a friend who swears by doubles. He'll constantly post how great doubles is to watch and how much he loves playing doubles over singles.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe after this, I'm going to make a concerted effort to watch a little more doubles to try to find it on the tennis channel.
You know what my favorite doubles is badminton. Badminton doubles are phenomenal watch.
It's funny because everyone in the U.S. where badminton isn't really popular, people kind of make fun of badminton because the most I remember about badminton was playing it in middle school, right, where you just kind of go out on the playground and hit it around. But if you watch the Olympics, which is the only place I've been able to catch professional badminton, that is hardcore.
Yeah, it is. And doubles is phenomenal. The court coverage that it takes on doubles is second to none. So enjoy that if you have the opportunity to watch doubles badminton.
Yeah, I feel like badminton's kind of the curling of the Summer Olympics.
Yeah,
everyone kind of makes fun of it, but it's actually
it's really, really exciting. It really is.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on. We have kind of stick with our team theme here. We had the Bryan brothers as a team, but we're going to move to a true team sport, which is baseball. And on July 8th in 1990, the Milwaukee Brewers got a full team effort, overcoming a 7-0 deficit while facing the California Angels. They were the California Angels at the time. And they scored 20 unanswered runs. They managed to tie it up heading into the fifth at 7-7, and then they put up 13 runs in the bottom of the fifth. Darryl Hamilton had a huge part in that. He had a grand slam. And that game was pretty exciting, but probably one of the few highlights for the Brewers that season. They ended up 6th place, 14 games behind the Red Sox. If you recall, the Brewers were in the American League at that time. But yeah, it was an interesting game. That team actually had 3 Hall of Famers on it: Dave Parker, Robin Yount, and Paul Molitor.
Yeah, they did, and they stunk up the American League East at the time. Mm-hmm. And it was really unfortunate that a team that had some aging superstars, and we do think about them, having 3 Hall of Famers, but this was Robin Yount, the center fielder, and this was Dave Parker, certainly not 1979. We Are Family Dave Parker. This was right at the end of his career. And Paul Molitor, who couldn't stay healthy, he only played 103 games. He had a shoulder injury in spring training that cost him almost all of April. He had a finger issue in August. He ended up missing the end of the season after a collision with Jim Gantner. So they could never really pull it together, and a lot of it had to do, Jeff, with that just awful pitching staff that this Brewers team threw out there. When Teddy Higuera is your number one, you in 6th place.
Yeah, the team was. I mean, Dave Parker actually had a pretty good season for 39 years old. He had 21 home runs, 92 RBIs. He got a Silver Slugger. He got some MVP votes.
And I love me some Dave Parker.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're right. The pitching was horrendous. The hitting overall, just the lineup in general, wasn't terrible. It was just pedestrian. They were kind of in the sort of the back half of the league in terms of hitting overall, not last. But the pitching was near bottom of the barrel or at the bottom for the American League. It's interesting in thinking about this team. The last time they were in the playoffs, they lost the World Series in 1982, and that was when they had a young Robin Yount and a young Paul Molitor. And that's probably what most people remember. That was actually Robin Yount's MVP season.
It was. And, they gave up, that pitching staff gave up more runs than any other team in the American League that year. And I blame Bud Selig a bit for the state of the Brewers at this time, because let's go back and remember that Bud Selig was one of the owners that was caught up in the scandal to try and keep free agent salaries down in the late 80s. He was still in charge of Milwaukee. He tried to make a PR stunt by signing Paul Molitor to a 3-year, $9 million contract so he could show how much money he was spending. But a 3-year, $9 million deal for an aging superstar is, 1, money poorly spent, and 2, it's not even really a competitive salary even back then. Right. And if you think about what was $9 million then, even with the inflation rate, $9 million with $3 million a year, that's about a $7,750,000 player today. And so that's Harrison Bader, Jeff. That's what he's making. That's Jaron Duran and Stephen Kwan and Michael Lorenzen money for Paul Molitor, who is your Hall of Famer and second face of your franchise, so that you can try and save face Bud Selig for not spending any money on this roster.
Yeah, they had a long drought where they just weren't in the playoffs, and a lot of it was probably related to exactly what you're saying. Ownership and the front office just not wanting to be competitive, being satisfied with sort of just existing, and they know they have a fan base that's going to come out and spend money. And we see that now with, the Angels are kind of an extreme case of that, where Artie Moreno doesn't really want to spend money. He's going to throw some money at a player to make the fans happy and say, oh, look, I spent on this player. But in terms of putting together a competitive team, does not want to spend money in the right way. And again, that's probably more of an extreme example, but I think we've seen this time and again where owners just want to placate the fans.
Yeah, they also had the worst defense in baseball that year. They committed more errors than any other team in the American League, and part of that had to do with the Paul Molitor injury. That messed up their entire rotation because Molitor was supposed to play third, and then when he came back, he couldn't throw, so they tried to move him to second, and then they ended up moving him to first, and that put Greg Brock out of position, so he was mad, and then Gary Sheffield didn't want to play third because he had to play third. Gary Sheffield wanted to play shortstop, but he couldn't because they didn't have another third baseman. And Gary Sheffield shouldn't have been playing third anyway, or shortstop. He should have been in the outfield instead of Rob Deere or Greg Vaughn, who were both hitting under 220. Darrell Hamilton should have been out there every day. So it was just a mess from beginning to end. And I said it starts with Bud Selig, and it trickles all the way down to players being out of position all throughout that really awful lineup. But they did make one good trade during that year when they got Ron Robinson from the Cincinnati Reds. He went 12-5 with a 2.91 ERA after they got him in June. So he was it for them. But he only played like 11 games after that, I think, over the next 2 seasons. 9 games over the next 2 seasons. So ultimately, not a good trade.
The thing that I always think about in baseball is there so many factors contribute to a winning and a losing season, right? And the ownership and front office can make all the right moves and still have a poor season. And it's usually sort of a mix, right? And so they probably weren't counting on Robin Yount to have a really down year. He had won the MVP the year before. But I think when you combine, you have to cushion yourself against sort of these unexpected, players have off years or injuries, like we said with Paul Molitor. And I think it goes back to ownership and what you said about Bud Selig, where, if you're cutting corners as ownership, you're cutting corners as the front office, you're not cushioning yourself against potential bad luck or unfortunate circumstances. So, it's just unfortunate. And the Braves went a long time before they were relevant. I mean, the Brewers went a long time before they were relevant again.
And this is also to sort of that transition to the creation of the idea of the small market. Like, I don't think small market teams knew they were small market teams before Bud Selig created that phrase. Because if you look at 1990, with the exception of the Red Sox, look at the rest of the playoffs that year. It was the A's winning the American League West, and the National League playoffs, that was the Reds versus the Pirates.
Yeah.
And most of those teams that now you throw them all into the, well, they're small market, blah, 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 blah. But that didn't really exist in the 80s, small market, that mindset. That was a Bud Selig invention. He coined that word like Pat Riley in the three-peat. That's a Bud Selig word, small market baseball.
Yeah, and Bud Selig as commissioner really started putting a lot of emphasis on sort of spending and dividing these teams up into, who's going to be competitive, who's not going to be competitive, and trying to, he had his famous saying where, every team should be spending money to be competitive, but the reality was that wasn't the expectation of a lot of teams. And Bud Selig, I think, is really the first commissioner who was really a lot more friendly to the owners, and where owners started not really wanting to spend because they knew that they could still make money and get money into their pockets.
Yeah, and that's because Bud Selig was an owner, and he was an owner of this particular Brewers team before he transitioned. So, yeah, he knew where it was, and that's why even though he's retired, the owners, I think they're still paying him $6 million a year, Jeff. Even though he's retired, I think that's his pension, if I'm not mistaken.
We have a Bud Selig day like a Bobby Bonilla day.
Right. Although I would say that $1 million to Bobby Bonilla is far more palatable than $6 million to Bud Selig. I would say that $6 million to Bobby Bonilla is more palatable than $1 million to Bud Selig. But
Bud Selig should be getting zero. Let's just put that out there. Okay, well, let's move on to another baseball post and another great player, one of my all-time favorite players. Yes, you got your Twins hat on. And sometimes we talked about struggling teams and players who have struggling years. But sometimes we have great players on not so great teams, and that takes us to Rod Carew, who on July 10th in 1977, the great Rod Carew finished his day with a .401 batting average. To be the last time his average was above 400 for the season. He finished hitting a paltry .388 on the year. But that was good enough to win MVP, and he won his 6th of his 7 batting titles. And I want to ask you, because we talked a lot about analytics and the state of today's game. So, Clayton, I want to start this discussion off by talking about, is Carew and all the skills that he had, is that a bygone era in baseball?
It almost is, because there's really only one other player playing today that fits the Rod Carew mold, and that's Luis Arraez.
Right.
And Luis Arraez doesn't have any value to a lot of people that determine those things. Now, I love Luis Arraez. I would be so happy to have Luis Arraez on my team because I think he does a lot of things that help you win. But all the children who work in the baseball ops office who are running teams off of their tablet and their phone and making multi-million-dollar decisions with a statistics degree and economics minor from an Ivy League school look at Luis Arraez and say he doesn't help you win. And you cannot look at Luis Arraez and you cannot look at Rod Carew and say that they don't help you win.
Right. I actually have another player I think is a little bit like Rod Carew. Maybe not as much as Luis Arraez, but Stephen Kwan has a little bit of that.
A little bit.
Right? High contact, low strikeout rate.
A lot more pop.
Really, he's got a little more power than Carew had. Mm-hmm. But Rod Carew he ended his career with a .328 batting average. And he had 15 straight years of 300 or better. He's actually the highest marks for any Latino player in the history of baseball to have, those batting average marks. And it's really just an example of him, prioritizing. You hear it so much in baseball these days; it's kind of cliche, but hit it, put the ball in play, and that was so valuable to Carew. And he could manipulate the ball so well when he was able to put it into play, and that's a skill that's really not taught anymore.
It's funny that we had spent so much time talking about the Bryan brothers, because to me, Rod Carew approaches hitting like a tennis player more than anyone else. And what I mean by that is, if you look at a tennis player when they're returning really fast balls, right? Serena hits 128. Zverev hits 144. Tiafoe's like almost 150. He's like 147, right? That's significantly faster than anybody you're going to see. I mean, everyone's going crazy over the Miz with his 105, right? And most of the guys are in the high 90s. So we're talking about 40 miles an hour faster a tennis ball is coming at you. And those guys step into it and decide where they're going to hit it on the court. Mm-hmm. And that's what Rod Carew did. He was able to see the ball, see the spin, know where it was going to be, and he approached it like, I'm going to flick it down the baseline. I'm going to flick it up the tee. I'm going to hit it just like a tennis player does with that open stance and both his eyes on the ball, same as a tennis player. And it worked magic.
Yeah, I mean, and it's the IQ of knowing what to do when you're at the plate. What do you need? What kind of hit do you need? And being realistic about your skill set. He knows he doesn't have the pop. He doesn't have the power. And maybe if he developed different skills, he could have had that, right? Was it Ichiro who said he could probably hit 40 home runs a year if he decided to become a different type of hitter, but he saw more value in being more of a singles hitter or someone who hits more line drives. And maybe Carew could have been that kind of player, but he saw value in putting the ball in play, hitting it where the outfielders aren't. And I think that showed a lot of success and a lot of discipline on his part.
And that's one of the things that irritates me when you start talking about the evaluation of today's scouts and baseball ops people when they look at somebody like Luis Ariz. And they say, well, he doesn't have enough value because he gets base hits instead of walks, right? If they want him to have more walks, then he would have more value. If his batting average were lower, right, and his walk rate were higher, and his on-base percentage was still the same, they would say that Luis Ariz has more value, correct? Mm-hmm. And I don't understand that because a walk and a hit are not the same thing. And they will all say it is. Well, the same thing as getting on first. But here's the thing. If you're on base, you can't go first to third on a walk. You can't score from second on a walk. You can't have nobody out and a runner on third and score on a walk. Hits have value. Right. They have a lot of value. And they score runs. And so I will take a higher batting average with a lower walk than the other way around all day.
Yeah, we hear so much about productive outs, right? A lot of managers really preach that, and I think maybe that's just a term they use, in game to try to, when they're managing the game and they want to game plan and they want to be productive with their offense. And it's interesting how productive outs don't necessarily trickle up to the front office where they're looking at that as a valuable skill.
Yeah, 90 feet means a lot.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, bunting isn't something that's really practiced much anymore. I kind of wonder if because bunting is not something that is really valued anymore, if you actually had a player who was really proficient in bunting, would the defense be able to handle that type of at-bat? Right. Because you see so much bad defense and the fundamentals are so poor, especially with pitchers who aren't really expected to do much else except throw the ball.
Yeah, look at how many little toppers you have that trickle out like bunts that turn into errors down the right field line, or turn into guys not being able to pick up the ball with their bare hands, or turns into fielders in the wrong position. Yeah. That speed really does make a difference. And yeah, granted, maybe if you have every single person trying to go up there and bunt, and they're going to get really good and proficient at it. But when you've got one or two guys that can have that sort of skill set, and like you said, understand the value of 90 feet like Rod Carew does. He was a good base stealer. And all these times, well, stealing third doesn't make any difference because you're already in scoring position at second, right? Not really. You ever seen a single to left field at Fenway Park? Third base matters at Fenway. Third base matters in Houston. Yeah. Where, you get a sac fly. You get a ground ball that kicks off of a fielder's glove, or you get a bad throw to first base, which happens all the time. There's just so many more ways to score, and every 90 feet that you can get has value, and it just doesn't, on these tablet brains that are running these baseball ops offices. They think, I want 20 home runs a year, but 20 home runs is less than one home run a week. I want base hits. I want runners on base. And I want to stack my lineup so that my guys who get on base are up when my guys hit home runs. So I don't get it. They would look at Rod Carew now and they'd be like, we're going to bat him like seventh today because we're going to bat Ohtani first. We're going to bat Bryce Harper first. Ridiculous. Bat Rod Carew first and let Ohtani and Bryce Harper knock him in, please.
I think also one thing that gets overlooked is that, if you have someone who's a threat to bunt, or you have someone who's a threat to, you can move someone over to third, it changes the defensive positioning so much, especially on the bunt. Now you have to worry about, am I giving that hitter too much space? Am I too far off the bag at third? What's the, you're thinking on those. It gets into more dimensions of the game, which is why it's always baffling to me that teams just haven't really decided to go in that direction. And maybe, everything is cyclical. Maybe in baseball things will kind of come back around. I actually was thinking about this watching Justin Robleski of the Dodgers, who I love watching pitch because he's such a throwback to some of the older eras of the past, and I'm really happy that the Dodgers let him develop that way. He pitches to contact. It's soft contact. He doesn't strike out a lot of guys. He's pretty efficient with the number of pitches he throws because he doesn't have to go through a lot of pitches in an at bat because he's inducing that soft contact. So everything is cyclical. Maybe we'll see more of that game get developed in the future.
Yeah, you talk about pressure on the defense. Like, if I was the Yankees, I would pull a trigger on Jazz Chisholm for Luis Ariz straight up because somebody like Jazz Chisholm gets confused about what to do when there's nobody on base. Like, forget about there's two guys on base and one out and somebody's bunting and forget about all that. He's a wackadoodle. He gets confused with no one on. So, give me that guy that creates chaos.
I wanted to ask you on Carew, and just thinking about the modern game, do you think that he'd struggle a little more with some of the shifting that goes on with defenses?
No, because they could shift him all over the place in the past, and he was fine with it.
It just wasn't as common as what you see now.
Right, but now there's holes everywhere because they'll play a guy up the middle, and could you imagine if you had one guy playing at the normal shortstop spot and another guy up the middle, like the normal defense is now? Rod Carew would hit that ball down the third base line in the old third base slot every single time. He would force you to play straight up like it's 1940.
It reminds me of softball.
Mm-hmm.
And the key to winning softball is just hitting gaps.
It's hit it where they ain't, or hit it to the guy that can't catch. Like that would purely softball, and that's what he could do. And that's what it all goes back to him approaching it like a tennis player. Is that most of the people are like, oh, you can't control where you hit the ball, but Rod Carew could. He could control where he hits the ball, and that's what made him so valuable. And he would do that all over these advanced defenses today because he'll take his single. He doesn't care that I only got a single today. I only went 5 for 5. Yeah, you got 400-mile-an-hour exit velos, and I didn't, but you're 0 for 4, and I'm 5 for 5.
I want to throw out a couple factoids for you, because if any team out there has a chance to sign the next Rod Carew and they don't, we should fire the entire front office because Rod Carew is the only player besides Willie Mays to win Rookie of the Year, MVP, have 3,000 hits, and make it to the Hall of Fame. I mean, that's pretty good company there.
Yeah, and
he also stole home 17 times.
And he scored home 7 times in 1969 in one season. But if you really want to know how great he was, here's a man that took the Angels to the playoffs twice.
That's right.
Twice!
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's Hall of Fame.
Yeah, their first playoff berth was in large part due to Rod Carew.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I want to move on to another baseball historical note that was really important. And, Rod Carew is a player of color. He was born in Panama. And he benefited from many of the players that came before him, starting with Jackie Robinson and integration. You and I have talked about integration and equality in baseball, how it's a long process, right? I think a lot of people think of it as sort of this singular event that coincided with Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier, but that's a process. And that process evolved on July 7th, 1971, when Commissioner Bowie Kuhn announced that the former Negro League players would receive full and equal membership into the Hall of Fame rather than a, quote, separate but equal wing. And the first player enshrined on that date, July 7, 1971, was legendary Satchel Paige, whose plaque was hung in the main hall along with all the other inductees. So a great day for baseball. I think Bowie Kuhn's not always that fondly remembered because of Kurt Flood and some of the labor issues that he fought against, but definitely deserves a lot of credit for making this happen.
Yeah, and the absolute right decision. And it's sort of amazing that was even a conversation at the time of how do we contend and navigate the Negro League players, and it wouldn't occur to me to do it any other way than to put everybody into the same hall and into the same display area. And baseball got this one right. And to the former players who were in the hall, they had a lot to do with pressuring Major League Baseball to do that right. That they said, we want Satchel Paige, we want Josh Gibson, we want these guys in here with us. Please do the right thing. And baseball, who doesn't always get it right, got it right with this decision.
Yeah, speaking of players who advocated for full inclusion was Ted Williams, who in his 1966 Hall of Fame speech, he said, "Baseball gives every American boy a chance to excel. Hope that someday Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson will be voted into the Hall of Fame as symbols of the great Negro League players who are not there only because they were not given a chance." And I think with the status that Ted Williams had in the game, that I think, several years before this decision happened, but as we know, things are a process and it takes several years. Can't help but wonder if, Ted Williams' speech really helped accelerate things.
Yeah, and when Ted Williams speaks, people listen, as they should. And it was really wonderful to have that as important as it is to make sure that the Negro Leagues are not forgotten. Having a separate wing for induction is not the way to go about it. There's certainly a place to explore that history and exhibits to be had dedicated to that history. But when it comes down to the players, are you a Hall of Famer? Are you not a Hall of Famer? They all belong together.
Yeah, and I think there was a lot of resistance to this. And one thing that critics would point to was, well, Jackie Robinson's included and Roy Campanella's included. But those were really only because of their MLB contributions, not due to their career in the Negro Leagues. And then, as we know, with Satchel Paige and then Josh Gibson and Buck Leonard were inducted the following year, and then Monty Irvin in 1973. Satchel Paige had a short MLB career, but most of all those players, their experience was in the Negro Leagues, and I think what it helped with was, it now brought up the conversation of some of these players were as good as the white counterparts, if not better. They just did not have the opportunity, like Ted Williams said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly is the proper way to honor these guys, to have everybody be all together. It's an entirely different conversation to have about what to do with the numbers, and was that the right decision to fold the Negro League numbers into the MLB numbers, and that something that happened later on. But in terms of everybody being recognized as an equal Hall of Famer, this is the only way to do it.
Do you have any thoughts on the more recent decision in 2020 where MLB officially recognized stats of about 3,400 Negro League players and what they accomplished in various leagues before baseball was integrated?
I have never been an advocate of changing history from what it was. I think that this is one of those things that I would like to have seen the numbers remain what the numbers were for each particular league, because we're looking at them separately anyway, in terms of what the accomplishment means. But I feel like to do that, and a lot of people don't understand when I say that. They get mad at me right away. They start yelling at me for wanting to keep the numbers different. But the reason I want to keep them different is I want MLB to have to wear this one. I want them to have to explain why those numbers are on separate columns. I don't want some 6-year-old kid to walk into the Hall of Fame in 10 years and not have to ask the question, Dad, why are Josh Gibson's numbers on this column and Babe Ruth's on this? Like, I want him to have to ask that question because I want his dad to have to answer it, and I want MLB to have to answer it. And if you fold them in suddenly over time, the reason that they were separated to begin with starts to get muddy. And we start to think that the world looked different than it did. And I don't want that. I want the world to look the way that it did, good, bad, ugly. Let's look at the world for the way it was. Don't ever tell me in life that it's 2nd down and 3 just to have me get to the line of scrimmage and find out that it's 4th and 7. Tell me it's 4th and 7 in the huddle so that I can make the appropriate decisions and the appropriate preparations for 4th and 7. And that's why I would like to keep them separate, because MLB needs to wear it, and MLB forever will need to answer the question as to why they are separate.
I think those are good points. One thing I do like about it is that it raises the conversation of, well, Josh Gibson hit all these home runs compared to, Babe Ruth, compared to Ted Williams, whoever, was he as good as them? And I think it brings that conversation up where we have to talk about it. And I think that touches a little bit on what you're saying, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, why couldn't Josh Gibson be part of Major League Baseball? Well, we all know why, because of segregation and racism and those sorts of things. But I think I like that it brings the conversation, because people can look at this and say, is it equivalent? Is it not? Mm-hmm. What's the story behind that? So
yeah, and that's
a little bit on what you're saying.
Yeah, that's why I like it being separate, because if you fold it all together, then somebody who maybe doesn't understand completely what they're looking at looks and goes, oh, well, Josh Gibson was the 4th best hitter.
Yeah.
Well, was he? Maybe he was the 1st. Maybe he was the 7th. We don't know, and this is why we don't know. And you've got to keep that conversation alive. And that history and that memory alive of why the things are the way that they are, and I felt like that diminished the struggle by making them all the same.
Yeah, agreed. So let's move on, because I think this is a really good segue into our next topic, which was about South Africa and apartheid. And actually, we're going to combine a couple posts that we had. And so on July 9th in 1991, South Africa was readmitted by the International Olympic Committee, or the IOC, to full Olympics eligibility. They had been banned for 21 years, came after the South African Parliament repealed key apartheid statutes and policies and unified its previously segregated sports federations. They competed under an interim national Olympic flag in 1992, and then they would compete for the first time under the new South African flag at the Atlanta Summer Olympics in 1996. And then a few years later, in 2004, FIFA announced that South Africa would host the World Cup, which they did in 2010, and we posted about that as well. On July 11th, in 2010, Spain, while in Johannesburg, won their nation's first World Cup. First I want to mention that I don't think people today truly realize how big of a deal normalizing South African relations on a variety of levels, and including the Olympics, how big of a deal that was. Growing up, and I know you and I are about the same age, growing up, apartheid was a massive issue in the 80s. And I think it was a sign that, looking back as we are talking about, having to answer for the injustices of the past, and making sure that, that wasn't forgotten about, but it was something that allowed for reconciliation by South Africa. Their international community got behind that. And it's interesting because it became kind of this evolving, unifying moment for the country of South Africa.
It certainly did, and we all sort of remember the sort of hushes of athletes who would find a way from South Africa to compete somewhere else. We certainly remember Zola Budd and her competing in the 1984 Olympics and the tangle that she got in with Mary Decker. And there were a number of other athletes that that sort of were able to navigate new allegiances in order to compete, and it was something that was sort of in hushed whispers. But when it came to the Olympics and the Olympic stage, it was very clear from 1964 all the way to 1992 that there was no South Africa, and this is the reason that there was no South Africa. And it was sort of, y'all want to change? Then we can talk. But until then, this is the way it is. And it was the IOC is one of those organizations that doesn't always get it right. But I felt like they really did get it right when it came to how they dealt with South Africa going into the 1964 Olympics. And I thought that they took appropriate steps coming out of 1990 and Nelson Mandela and the repeal of these laws and customs in order to create a path to bring athletes back, because there's certainly a large majority of people living in South Africa who are not to blame for the state of the last 25 years.
Yeah, I think the Olympics have such a unique place in our society in terms of sport, but also culture and politics. And it gets so intertwined in the Olympics, where if you're excluded from the Olympics, that's probably a much bigger deal than just not having athletes participate in these events. It says a lot about your country, and I think South Africa went through that. But upon their relations being normalized or their eligibility being normalized, it set off a chain reaction where other international sports leagues and sports also followed suit, right? You had rugby and cricket also normalized South African participation. And I think it was especially in 1996 when it was the first time that the country competed under a new South African flag. The country really rallied around it, and I think they were starting to feel that they had moved. They weren't ignoring the horrors of the past, but that was also the same year that they had ratified a brand new constitution that was fully integrated, and their society was moving in that direction. Obviously, things don't change overnight, so they still had a lot of issues they were grappling with. But I think it was a moment where the country started feeling, okay, we can, as a unified South Africa, whether it was white, black, whoever, we can all rally around this is our nation and we're all one people.
And that all began with sport there in 1995, to not devalue how important the Rugby World Cup was, that it happened in South Africa, that Nelson Mandela, that members of the new parliament and Congress rallied around the Springboks team, which was for many people seen as a white team, not a South African team. And for them to be able to sort of not just rally around that team, but for that to be a very successful international event in a place that was not used to holding international events and had been precluded from doing so. And then for them to win, and not just win, but beat New Zealand, the number one team in the world, was a huge rallying point for them. And to have Nelson Mandela, who had every reason to be, let's say, at arm's length from the tradition of the Springboks and the rugby program, to embrace that and to wear the Springboks jersey and the hat and to say one South Africa, one team, that really paved the way to them going into the Olympics and then to get to the cricket and then ultimately to the biggest non-Olympic event on the calendar, which is the World Cup.
Yeah, and Nelson Mandela, who was a little hesitant at first when the eligibility was reestablished, I think he felt that they didn't want to act like, okay, now everything is great and everything is fine, because they still had a lot of growth, they had a lot of division, they had there wasn't acceptance wasn't widespread throughout South Africa. They were dealing with a lot of violence coming out of apartheid and threats of civil unrest by repealing a lot of these apartheid statutes. But when they got closer to 1996, and then he realized the unified flag that South Africa moved towards, he did note that sports can have a positive influence and foster global peace and reconciliation. And I think some of that was looking at the world rallying around him and rallying around the cause to pressure South Africa to eliminate apartheid and move towards more equality.
And there also has to be with nations, you kind of got to look at yourself the same way that you would look at yourself as a human being. And one of the things that has always bothered me with the society of good deed doers that have gone around to tell everyone exactly how to live is they will say, if you have scars on your face, stand and accept them and move forward and live your life. Don't be defined by the blemishes on your face. But if you're a country, they're like, you can't have any. You can't have any. And if you have any, you have to bury them. And you go get plastic surgery. And South Africa understands that it has blemishes. And they still stand there and say, we are moving forward, blemishes and all. We will heal. We will get better. And that's an important lesson for all of us.
Really quick, I want to touch on Spain because there is a natural connection between the Olympics in South Africa and Spain because in part of that normalization of South Africa as an international sports entity was the World Cup. And as I mentioned, they won their first World Cup in 2010. And Spain is a country maybe that they haven't dealt with apartheid and fissures as deep as that, but like any country, they do have political factions and issues. And this was a really unifying moment. And it in thinking about South Africa and thinking about this World Cup, it really shows that sports can have such a unifying feeling for the country. I mean, there was a chant that got popular in Spain, Somos Españoles, which is we are Spaniards, and that was kind of one of the only times where the entire country really rallied around a singular event.
Yeah, and that's odd and rare for Spain because, like you said, if there's somebody that's factious, it's Spain. When they go around in the Vuelta, you will see 4 different flags being flown all across Spain. There will be the national flag with the crest, the national flag without the crest. There will be the old flag of the monarch. There will be the flag of the Basque Country. And they're all flown with equal vigor around Spain. And so it was a huge moment for Spain to come together and be one in a country that was learning to come together and be one. And a really unfortunate play for the Dutch, who are still looking for their first World Cup, that it came down to extra time and a poor sort of lazy clearance that caused that goal, especially when their national hero, Arjen Robben, had so many chances to give the Dutch their first World Cup. But it was a pretty good game, all things considered.
Yeah, and the Spain really sort of there were so many matches where they almost lost, but they didn't. In fact, they were, I believe, the first country to actually win when they dropped the first game of the tournament, and they had a lot of 1-0 wins. So pretty exciting time for Spain, and it was. Yeah, I think nothing says about sports how it can be such a unifying, activity or event for a country because the euphoria was short-lived. They went back to their divisions, fissures once the World Cup honeymoon was over. But at least for that time being, they felt really good and they were one country.
And I don't know if you saw this, but South Africa has announced to the IOC that they will be bidding on the 2036 and the 2040 Olympics, looking for one of the two of them. It would be the first time that any Olympic Games have been held on the continent of Africa. And former IOC President Thomas Bach said that he was supportive of the bid. And as we all know, that Kirsty Coventry, who is the IOC president, is from Zimbabwe, the first woman to be IOC president and the first person from Africa to be IOC president. So we will see if they are able to get their bid together and have some of the infrastructure issues that have plagued them a little bit, if they're able to overcome those. They certainly did for South Africa's World Cup bid. So we will see where the next Olympics go in 2036 and 2040.
Yeah, I hope they get it. It'd be great to have an Olympics on the African continent. So that would be awesome.
And one more note that you saw, Russia has been reinstated. Russian athletes will be allowed to compete in qualifying events under their nation's flag. The ban was lifted for the Paralympic Games in Milan, which did not get hardly any world press, as I think the IOC intended to bury that during the Paralympics when no one was, not as many eyeballs were on them, so that now when everyone is outraged who is hearing about it for the first time, they can say, but this has been going on since February, and how have you missed? Because I know the majority of people will have heard it for the first time right here, even though it happened in March. The IOC is sneaky that way, but Russia is back.
Well, it's pretty smart because people will say they'll be outraged for the first time, and the response will be, well, we did it during the Paralympics, and people will say, what's the Paralympics?
Right.
because they don't really follow it that closely.
Yep. Imagine that.
I saved the best for last here. I want to move on to another, staying in Europe. We had Spain. We're going to talk about France now. And speaking of unity, nothing brings together the French like the Tour de France.
That is correct. It's the people's race.
That's right. And so on July 12th in 1964, a truly dramatic day, an exciting period in French cycling, two great competitors, Jacques Anquetil and Raymond Poulidor, went pedal stroke for pedal stroke during stage 20 of Le Tour. It was Poulidor who came in third, besting Anquetil who came in fifth. And Poulidor captured the hearts of France. But despite that, Anquetil won the entire thing, and it was the last of his 5 Tour wins, which at the time was a record for Tour wins. So, Clayton, I want to let you take us through stage 20 in this day, because I know Tour is your secret love in the world.
It is my not-so-secret love. My new secret love is watching you attack French names. So that you actually did pretty good. Jean Anquetil and Raymond Poulidor. So very good.
Those 5 years of middle school and early high school French paid.
Very nice, very nice. And what was really great about this particular stage was that it was up the Puy de Dôme. And the Puy de Dôme is one of the iconic climbs that has made a number of appearances throughout the Tour de France. If you think about Puy de Dôme, the Col de Galibert, and the Tourmalet, and Alpe d'Huez, and Mont Ventoux, like these, there always seems to be at least one, sometimes two, of these iconic climbs in every one of the tours. And they are always of the utmost importance as to who wins the day. And this was certainly true in this particular 1964 Tour de France, that the two of those riders, although not competing for the win, and I think a lot of people, when they think about in their head, think that this was for the win, they were third and fourth on the day. But the real battle for the stage race, for the overall general classification, came down to this climb. And Poulidor had a lot of time that he needed to make up, and he made up like almost 40 seconds, getting it down to about 14-second deficit going into the final stage in a time trial on the last stage of the day. And it was just an unbelievable epic battle. And one of the reasons that Anquetil and Poulidor were so famous is, like last week, they were polar opposites, like Agassi and Sampras.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what helped them is that this year, 1964, was the very first year that the Tour de France was on live television. And it had gone from reading about it in the paper or hearing an update on the radio to being able to watch these two superstars that you had followed your whole career from afar and getting to watch them on TV. It's like seeing Ted Williams and Joe DiMaggio in the same, like finally seeing them. They've only been people you'd read about in the paper, and now you're at Yankee Stadium seeing the game.
Yeah.
And that's what this was.
Yeah, and I think up to that point, sort of more to your point about it moving to TV, it was like, it was this kind of imagined sort of these mythical personalities, and Anquetil was sort of this sort of, they said, hauteur of Maître Jacques, and he was like very like snooty, kind of snobbish, and just like everything with the French, right, it boils down into these sort of, you know, populist versus establishment, or right versus left politics. And so he was kind of representative of that sort of conservative establishment, and the Poulidor, they call him Poo Poo, right? He had he was like the everyman, right? He was the son of a farmer, and he was sort of that populist, and he was always the perennial underdog, and he was the guy who didn't win as much as he should have, and everyone kind of and that's why he captured the hearts, because people could relate to him a little bit more.
Yeah, we think about France as being this sort of cosmopolitan, progressive, super snooty place, and that is Paris, and that is Nice, and that is high society of France, and there's a lot of it. But the majority of France is like middle America in the United States. It is rural, it is hardworking, it is down to earth, and he was the people's champion. His nickname ended up being the Eternal Second, because he was 8 times on the podium at the Tour de France, but he not only did he not win, he never got to wear the yellow jersey. He never led the race. But he was still the fan favorite, even though he won some pretty big races in his career. He won the Vuelta de España, one of the majors. He won Paris-Nice. He won the Dauphiné. He was the national champion of France. He won Milan-San Remo. He won Flèche Wallonne. And we know what we know about Flèche Wallonne, right? If you can survive the wall up the Mur de Huy in the Flèche Wallonne, then you can climb these iconic climbs. Like he did on the Puy de Dôme, just sort of leaving Jean Anquetil sort of halfway down the mountain. But in defense, let me just defend Anquetil, though, because I think a lot of people still have that perception that he was super snooty, and he was really very introverted, and he didn't like to do the interviews, and he didn't like the party circuit. He wanted to go home and spend time with his wife, and he didn't want to go to all of these places. So he was very short in his appearances that he was forced to do by his teams. And he got that reputation of being super snooty, but he really was not. And I think it's important for people to know that he was just very introverted, and he didn't like to publicly speak, and he loved his wife very much and wanted to hang out with her. And that's why he wasn't where he was. Whereas Poulidor, on the other hand, was like the guy that would ride 6 hours in the Tour de France, and then he would go to the pub for, a wine and a cheese sandwich and like yuck it up with the locals. And they loved it.
Yeah. I think the other thing that helped sort of extend Poulidor's sort of place with the people and sort of ingratiate himself, when they introduced doping controls in 1966, he actually openly welcomed it, and he said happy to do doping, when most of the riders actually sort of rebelled and refused to. They didn't want any part of the doping controls, and not accusing anyone of anything. I think it was just a culture shock probably for the sport of cycling, but he welcomed that, and I think sort of that populist side of the populist appeal that he had with the majority of cycling fans was that, oh yeah, here's this regular guy. He's happy to, he doesn't have anything to hide. He's just a regular guy. So I think that really helped sort of with his sort of legacy and how fans viewed him.
And also to the loyalty that not just he had to his team, but his team had to him. He spent his entire 18-year career at Mercier, so that's another reason I got the purple on today. Nice. For Poo Poo, but he was, as I said, beloved, and I tried to go back and sort of think of, is there a comparison, an American comparison for the lovable loser that Poulidor was, even though he won 189 races in his career. So it was just really at this major that he had his trouble, the biggest race in the world, and you think about there's like Ernie Banks. People loved Ernie Banks, even though he was a loser. People loved Ted Williams. Even Yankee fans will tell you they have nothing but respect, even if they rooted against Ted Williams. Like you respect the player that he was and the man that he was. And I think the closest I could get to is Greg Norman, because Greg Norman had all of those moments where he almost won a major, and he did end up winning one. He won one major, but he had the playoff that he lost to Larry Mize, and he had the other playoff that he lost to Fuzzy Zeller, and he lost on the last hole to Jack. And he was pretty well liked by the public, but what a special relationship that Raymond Poulidor had to the Tour de France, and what an important figure that he was. And I don't know if you saw this or not, Jeff, but I know that Poulidor is smiling in the sky tonight because his grandson Mathieu van der Poel, won stage in the Tour de France today.
Okay. All right. Oh, that's great. It's very timely.
Mm-hmm.
So who do you, I know you're following the Tour closely for this year. What do you, who are you pulling for? What are your thoughts?
My hope is that Jonas Vingegaard from Visma Lease a Bike can make a race of it against Tadej Pogačar from UAE. But he's already 2.5 ahead. They're going into the rest day tomorrow. Tadej Pogačar looks unstoppable. He would win his 5th Tour de France if he wins today, which puts him up there with Jean Conquetil and Eddie Merckx and all of the greats have won 5. And so this really puts him up there with the rest of them, and he probably has another 4 or 5 years that he could win this race. So I just hope it's a good one. I hope that he doesn't bury Jonas Vingegaard too soon, because he's the only competition that he's got, and he's in great form, and he's still 2.5 minutes behind.
All right, Clayton. Well, let's wrap it up there. I know we're going to get another tour update next week. Look forward to that. But for everyone out there, if you like history, you want to learn more, there's a new history post every day. We always have it up on our social media, and then we wrap it up at the end of the week with this podcast. So everyone out there, remember to follow us along on your social media sites that you're on. We're at Sports History SL. That's Sports History, the letter S and the letter L. We're on Blue Sky, Instagram, Substack, X, and YouTube. And on Facebook, you can still find us at Sports and Leisure. So please comment, like, share, and love hearing fan observations. We're starting to get a lot more comments out there. So as everyone knows, as much as we love talking about sports history, we love sharing it even more. All right, Clayton, we'll see you next week.
See you next week, Jeff.